I'm going to be honest with you. I love games that have lots of settings, but the Monster Hunter Wilds settings are a nightmare. There are a million different things to look at, and a lot of times those settings have settings, and those require you to read and evaluate like 2 to 5 different options and make a meaningful choice, and all of those will legitimately affect your gameplay. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through all of the settings, explain what they do, and occasionally make some recommendations along the way. So if you've been frustrated with your SEIKRET, wanting more control over your support hunter assistants, or fighting the new control schemes, I'll be covering things that can help. To start, we'll go over the default game settings tab, which is pretty straightforward. Do you want damage numbers off, on, or on with decimals? How big do you want your minimap to be? In town, in combat, when aiming, or when holding LB? There's a lot of options. Here you can also control whether the map rotates or whether north is always up. And another cool option here is the angle. You can set it so that the minimap is always top down, always at a fixed default angle, or have it adjust with the angle of your camera. Which is interesting because that way if your camera is top down, the map will be top down. I don't know how practical that is, but it is something that you can do. Next, there are a variety of settings that control when various gauges are displayed. Dynamic, which is the default, will turn them off when they're irrelevant, but you can also opt to have them always be on. Here you can also control various subtitles and closed captioning settings. The one thing that's probably most important here are the ally hit and ally critical effects. If you want to only keep track of your own damage output, you can turn these off so your screen isn't destroyed by 3 other hunters all pumping out DPS. Blood can also be turned off here for what it's worth. Next up, some settings that control weapon and helmet visibility. I immediately came here and turned off head armor visibility because I like to see my hunter's face when I'm fighting. Both weapons and helmets can be turned off during cutscenes, but only helmets can be turned off during gameplay. For some reason, your weapon has to remain visible outside of cutscenes at all times, so sorry if you wanted to turn that off this time around. You can also check out obscured hunter visibility, which lets you see hunters behind monsters with a white outline, but if you want, here you can also turn that off or change it to black, yellow, red, or blue. Meanwhile, if you find their SEIKRETs getting in the way, you can actually turn them off so that while unmounted, your allies' SEIKRETs will completely disappear from the screen. If you find yourself annoyed by the new auto explore feature, you can turn that on or off here. This essentially boils down to this. With all default settings, when you jump on your SEIKRET with a waypoint set, it'll automatically start running towards that. This is because auto explore is on. If you want to manually control your SEIKRET, you need to exit auto explore mode by moving it, well, manually. So unless you turn this setting off, you will have to do that even with no waypoint set. This is also where you'll find all of your support hunter settings. Honestly, this is a really cool method of controlling difficulty. Since you can hunt with up to 3 support hunters, even though the monster will grow in health and toughness, they can still make things a lot easier than doing it alone. But here you can control what they can and can't do. Want them to stop setting traps? Turn it off. Tired of them mounting the monster when you'd rather be the one doing that? Can turn that off here too. The same can be said for using slinger ammo, power clashes from repeatedly blocking the monster, and offset attacks which cancel monster attacks. In short, you can make hunts easier or harder, putting more or less responsibility on yourself to actually do these things. There's also a really important setting here for hunting horn users, but I have no idea how that weapon works, so here you go. Just know that they exist. And the last setting of this tab controls tutorials, controller vibration, and name displays. Good news. That's like 4 or 5 minutes, and there's only 6 more tabs to go. Next up, the controls tab. There's a lot of customization options here, most of which are self-explanatory. I'm using a controller to play, so naturally it displays different things here than if I was using a keyboard, but for the most part, everything is the same. Here you can control whether your controller follows Xbox, PlayStation, or Nintendo standards for what the confirm button is, though the answer is always A. You can also adjust dashing, choosing whether it uses one of 2 different buttons or both. Button configurations is a huge one here and fundamentally changes what all of the buttons do on your controller. By default, the D-pad is set to control your SEIKRET orders, which is a big change from previous Monster Hunter games. The big thing here that you really need to decide is what your default D-pad does. Do you want it to control the SEIKRET and weapon switch, or do you want it to navigate the item bar? Despite there being 3 different options to control, the radio menu shortcut will never be an option for the D-pad by default. Instead, you have to decide whether you want the radio menu on holding left bumper in the D-pad or holding left bumper in the face buttons. The non-D-pad option will take the place of whatever you don't choose. So in reality, despite there being 4 options to choose from here, you're really only making 2 choices. There are also some other quick options in how long you want to have to hold the button for something to happen, and whether your hunter automatically sheaths their weapon or not. I know some people hate automatic sheathing, you could turn that off here. I will say directional controls sound simple, but I know a lot of people are actually changing this. In short, type 1 is camera-based movement and type 2 is hunter-based movement. So if you want your character to back up when holding down, you want type 2 movement. If you want your hunter to move towards the screen when holding down, you want type 1. Keep in mind that keyboard and controller have different settings here in case you want to play with both. For the expanded item bar controls, I recommend you simply test these out yourself since it's so easy to do in camp. Use what comes most naturally for you since you may need to quickly tab through your item bar. And if you're a traditionalist, you can also turn off Slinger auto load here. On the next tab, there are a lot of menu controls that are largely inconsequential. But there are some focus mode controls here that are useful. For one, you can either opt for hold or toggle modes for focus mode. And if you go into advanced controls, you can set it up so that ranged and melee weapons have different settings. The next part is also where you set up your SEIKRET, which a lot of people are probably looking for because, let's be honest, the default settings are a bit strange. For call SEIKRET controls, you basically decide whether you want holding down the B button to do anything, and you can opt for it to either put them out in auto or manual mode. You also set how you want your SEIKRET manual controls to function here, which is really important, because by default, even in manual move mode, your mount still functions similarly to auto move, where it will maintain current speed even if you touch nothing. If you want full manual controls based only on your input, you must change this setting here. Route controls are also here. By default, the SEIKRET will only depart from its route if you move the left stick while it is moving at top speed. If you want it to exit no matter what speed it's at, you need to swap to type 2 and also hit B. And if you want to swap controller button icons from Xbox, PlayStation, or Nintendo, you can do that on the last option in this tab. For once, we're blessed with a pretty straightforward settings tab, and that's camera controls. Adjust these to your liking, but one you may want to take a look at is camera distance. Zoom will either put you directly over your hunter's shoulder like a third-person adventure game, or zoom it much further out for more visibility. Pan is weird because you can control how centered your hunter is. At the max setting, your hunter is like off in the left-hand corner, which I find strange, but to each their own. You can also alter camera shake while you're here if you find that too jarring. If you don't like how the camera focuses on monsters, I know I saw a bunch of people complaining about that, that can be toggled off here as well. Reticle direction is really controlling how your aiming works. They're a bit confusing, but if you find it's not really acting how you would like, I recommend toying around with these. I'm not going to go into them because they're really hard to put into words, but know that they're here. Fun fact, hitting the left bumper actually makes the camera aim at the targeted monster twice to aim where your hunter is facing. You can control that functionality here, inverting it, or making it so that it only does one or the other instead of both. Don't miss out on target/objective selection. It's sneakily important since it determines whether your SEIKRET is in auto move mode or not. By default, if you have a monster targeted, the game will automatically set your objective as it, even if you untarget it. If you want to be able to freely mark targets without changing objectives, you must set it to either link or do not link. The former makes it so that your objective is always what you target. The latter makes it so that targeting doesn't affect your objective at all. Hopefully with all of those combined, you can get the SEIKRET controlling how you want. If you adjust all of those, it should be much easier to handle and you don't have to fight it as much. I won't be going over display settings here as they're all based on your personal machine and what it can handle. And the same goes for graphics, though I will say this. I personally recommend turning off frame generation if your computer can get enough FPS without it. It does make the game run at a higher frame rate, but I found it to make things look much less sharp, which I wasn't a fan of at all. For optimal settings, I recommend this YouTube video that I'm going to link down in the comments below. They're specialists. They've looked at all of the frame rate impacts and everything to help you put this stuff together. I followed it myself, and I'm not just going to copy them, so go check them out. Volume controls, also really simple, though this is where you set whether your Palico speaks English or the feline language, so if you don't like this whole swap to actual communication, just change it back here. No big deal, don't have to deal with it. And finally, there's the accessibility tab, which has automatic settings to help with color blindness, increase visual or auditory accessibility, or reduce motion sickness. Keep in mind that these settings go in and automatically change a handful of settings throughout the options. So change them, be careful because you'd have to go back and swap them yourself, I believe. If you're looking for arachnophobia options, as per my other video, you can only alter those from the main menu, so you'll need to quit out to do so. Anyway, that's a whole lot. Do you have any recommendations for people to change yourself? There's a bunch of settings in there. If you have any optimization tips for other users, just let people know down in the comments below. If you want to support the channel, that's one of the best things you can do. All you have to do is leave a like, a comment, subscribe, leave a single emoji. I know it seems weird to be asking for just that. YouTube really loves engagement, even if it's just that. So, as always, appreciate the support. For now, though, I think that's it. I'll see you next time.